Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Murder in Black and White by David Alexander. This is copyright 1951 by Random House. And you'll see this is a rather interesting photographic cover that actually has quite a bit of bearing on the plot. So it's one of those nice jackets that actually reflects the content of the book, which is not always the case. I also want to show you the back cover copy here. In the old Random House Mysteries, they used to market other books on their list with this, I don't know if you'd call it kind of a newsletter or a preview called The Hangman's Noose. I'm sorry, it's backwards. I don't know how to change that in settings. But you could see it offers some suggestions for other Random House mysteries that you might like to read. And I really think modern publishers should bring something like this back. But, nobody's asking me. But I still think it would be a really good idea. So a little bit about David Alexander. There's not a lot to really say. He was a newspaperman, a journalist. He covered horse racing. He wrote detective fiction, had a couple of series characters, one of which, Bart Hardin, is a Broadway editor. But he is not the investigator in this book. This book stars a man named Soldier. His real name is Terry Bob Rook, but he goes by the nickname of Soldier. So how's that for a great hard-boiled name? Soldier. It's, it oozes macho. It oozes tough guy, kind of like Reacher. There's just something about these two-syllable eponymous names that, make for a good protagonist. So let me tell you a little bit about the book. I really didn't know much about David Alexander before I started reading. And so I went in as a tabula rasa, just sort of expecting kind of hard-boiled from the way the book looked on the cover, and quick scan of the jacket, and that is what it is. That said, it's kind of this interesting / odd mixture of comedic and noir, and I'll get into that a bit. So our story begins when when Soldier is called in to investigate this sort of puzzling mystery of a man who has hanged himself, apparently a suicide, but it's pretty obvious just from looking around the room that this was set up and that it was actually a murder. And Soldier is going to get to the bottom of it. The murdered man has a pet parrot who is rather foul-mouthed and is part of the comedic element of this book. And the parrot itself doesn't really play a part in the mystery, but his cage does, because his cage is where certain items, shall we say, have been hidden that will help Soldier figure out what's going on. The interesting thing here is that Soldier is not really the investigator. He is the gatherer of information for the real detective. So in a way, he's almost like Hastings in the Agatha Christie books. It's Hastings with Hercule Poirot, although Hastings is much more of a sort of gentleman, even if he can be kind of thick sometimes. Or maybe a better analogy would be Archie Goodwin to Nero Wolfe, because Archie's kind of a tough guy and Nero Wolfe is a quirkmeister. And quirkmeister is a good word for the lead detective here, whose name, rather silly, is Tommy Two Toes. And that's what I mean about this kind of weird admixture. You're putting together some hard-boiled characters with this sort of very effete, literally 300-pound detective, Tommy Two Toes, who speaks in an utterly pretentious way. He's extremely conceited. I mean, he makes Hercule Poirot look humble by comparison. And his quirks also make Nero Wolfe look like, your standard everyday guy. Tommy Two Toes, I can't say that the character really appealed to me. That the kind of inflated, conceited way that he speaks was a little bit off-putting, and there's just actually, I'll tell you what it reminded me of the most is Philo Vance. If you've ever read the books by S.S. Van Deen starring Philo Vance, Philo Vance is unbearable. I mean, I don't know how those books were successful. I think even in the day, people could not stand Philo Vance's verbal diarrhea and logorrhea. He was just too much and too full of himself and utterly annoying. And Tommy Two Toes is a little bit annoying. He's got the benefit of being a multimillionaire, so he can throw money at whatever problem he wants to solve. He can buy information. And in this book, he is sort of he's got kind of ties to Broadway and the entertainment business, and he's putting together kind of a circus act or a group of oddities, let's call them, that he's going to try to get a contract for or a show for. One is a little person. One is a very diva-like psychic. One is a man who owns an enormous Great Dane that is actually a big coward. Another is a magician who pulls guinea pigs instead of rabbits out of hats. So you can see this is kind of wacky, and there's I don't know that there's a little bit of a disconnect between some really fine hard-boiled writing in here and this comedic aspect of Tommy Two Toes, whose very name is kind of ridiculous. And when I talk about the fine noir writing, I do mean that as a sincere compliment. There's a part of this book where our hero Soldier has to go to investigate a house in a really seedy part of Brooklyn that's kind of under the Brooklyn Bridge, and just the way he describes that area and the real estate and the denizens and the street, really, really good noir writing. And then the comedic part comes from listening to Tommy Two Toes bluster and talk about how, the solution to the mystery has been obvious to him from the very beginning. And it is true that he figures out the culprit based on a piece of evidence that is fairly presented to us that really requires the reader, though, to have some medical background to pick up on it. And then Tommy builds this entire edifice. He tells the entire story of what has happened based on this one giveaway point. So the detection is based on something solid, but how he built this entire story out of the various bits and pieces that Soldier brings to him isn't particularly clear. But we've seen that in a lot of different books, right, where the solution is kind of dropped on us, and it makes perfect sense because all the pieces fit together, but you're just not sure what mental process led to the linking of all these points to come to, the full story. So I would say that I like this book somewhat. I don't feel super enthusiastic about it because, for the reasons I've talked about, it kind of kept me unsure of what ground I'm on. I mean, I guess it's almost like watching a TV show. If you're watching a comedy, you want it to be a comedy, and if it's a drama, you want it to be a drama. I'm not sure, at least for my taste, if that kind of mixture works. But I do think that Alexander was a good writer. I think the title is actually pretty ingenious. A lot of titles that have murder or death, they're just sort of, they signal, okay, here's a mystery. If you're a mystery reader, buy this book and you'll get what you want. But it points to a sort of a very clever aspect of the plot that you won't understand until you've sort of turned the last page. And I like that. I like when I say, aha, that is where the title comes from. And I didn't see it coming. And I give props to David Alexander for that. So if you read it, see what you think. Drop a line here. Tell me if you think it's worth other readers out there trying him. I do have a couple other books. I think I picked up several of them at the same time because they were all together in a used bookstore for a really cheap price. And I will read a couple more. I'm interested in seeing what this Bart Hardin series is about. Reading about the theater is, always kind of interesting, especially from the day. It feels like it might be sort of vaudeville theater or very early days of theater in New York, which is the setting here, which I think I already said when I talked about Brooklyn. So that's what I've got for you tonight. David Alexander's Murder in Black and White. Check it out, see what you think, and thanks for watching and have a good night.